In this case, it's only loaded when the server starts up again, so you might have to write the file and then blue screen the PC or something to cause it to reboot. And but that's one area that I think needs to be will probably get plugged up pretty quickly by the vendors out there. Now, the more difficult ones to do are things like DNS cache poisoning. One of the things you can do is, like I said, it's an RPC interface to the server, and if you go back to when they first put it in there was almost no security on the RPC. You could just about call it from any function you wanted to. On Windows XP Service Pack 1, there were several exploits out there, not very well published, that were able to do it. And on XP 2, there are still some sneaky ways of getting around it, but it's a little hard. Now, it turns out that under Vista, it's very hard to do because they plugged up the holes pretty good. On the RPC, you have to have some pretty hard to get ACLs and things to get in the system, and it's kind of hard to get there. The other thing is that if you're not going to talk the RPC, how about if you go around and send some packets back up from a computer, maybe the one that's being attacked to itself or to another one on the LAN, and say, oh, by the way, you went out and asked for what the IP address of something was. I'll go through and tell you what it is. And I'm going to skip these RPC interface things because we're short on time here. Okay, so the spoofing DNS, yeah, okay. So what we're trying to do is we're saying, okay, if I create a packet that I send back, it turns out that DNS is fairly flexible in what it receives, although you're supposed to match the source IP and an address going out and coming back in. They really don't. If you look through this list, like the fourth one, the destination port number must match. The sixth one, the transaction ID must match. And the last one, you must set it up in timing-wise so that if someone queries, the answer comes back, the bad answer you're going to give comes back before the real answer comes back from the domain name server. So one of the first issues they had was how do you spoof this thing and guess the domain number? Well, it turns out that if you remember in high school or classes, a lot of times people would say, hey, the probability of two students having the same birthday in a class of 23 is like over 50%. And this is because of the fact that it's like 20 people times 20 people across the possibilities. It's a lot more common than you'd think. So it turns out that using the formula that if I'm trying to guess a number, I have a 50% chance of just randomly picking 260 numbers that one of those numbers will match an ID of something that goes out. So this is how a lot of times they attack the problem of how do you guess what the ID for the transaction is. Now it turns out if you're surfing or if you're actually sniffing the network, you don't have to go through that, but this is sort of one of the attacks that if you can't do it, you can get there. What can we put in our response when it goes back? One of the things is that it'll accept, if you ask for one name, something like google.com, it can return back not only the address for google.com, but from exploit.foo and things like that. So you can actually add extra answers into the DNS reply, and in most cases, there's some things it won't catch, but most of the time it'll go in through and float into the kernel, or into the DNS cache. Now Windows Vista actually does a pretty good job of looking for that stuff. XP Service Pack 2, it seems to have sort of a hit and miss kind of a thing, like some things it finds, some things it doesn't. So, turns out, interestingly enough, there are a few things now since mydoom.b, I think, that was made. If you go look through the strings that are in your API, all of these names in here happen to be something that they don't use DNS for, they don't use the cache for. It's like they've hard-coded what to do. So you can poison all you want to in the cache, and you can still get to office.microsoft.com to get a patch. So it's something that would be nice if it was available for other vendors to be able to use too, the same technique. So when we talk about countering these things, I think one of the first things you should do is you should monitor this host.ics file to watch for writes. You can watch for DNS overwrites. In other words, if somebody comes into the cache and changes the IP address associated with something, that's probably not likely to happen in real time, so that's probably a good day zero kind of a thing. If you're looking for bursts of DNS, the way you slow down the DNS server, the real one, so you can get your spoof in, is you send it a whole bunch of requests, hope it gets busy, and you get your spoof in before it comes back. So looking for bursts of traffic like that on the LAN is another way of doing this. So we can look and see who's adding records to the DNS cache, if you're going to watch this, who's accessing the files. We want to maybe look at the response in the DNS to see if there are additional answers coming back that shouldn't be. And you might want to turn around then and try to monitor the LPC and RPC connections to the DNS service. So I rushed through that, and I think there's not even enough time for questions and answers. I'll be around if someone wants to talk to me afterward.